TSS True Scary Stories. The Intruder. I grew up in a rural part of Oregon. There wasn't much to do there, just trees, fields, and a lot of alone time. If you liked nature and solitude, it was the perfect place. As for me, I didn't hate the countryside, but if I had the choice, I'd rather live closer to a big city. So the moment I had a car and some savings, I left. My parents sold the property about 5 years ago, so they don't own it anymore. But even now, I still feel haunted by something that happened there when I was 13 years old. The property was about 3 acres, with a pretty large house and a storage shed out back. My parents trusted me enough to leave me home alone at that age. I was responsible and even helped take care of the place. That day, it was the weekend, and I was playing Vice City on my PS2 in the living room when suddenly I heard a loud metallic bang from outside. It sounded like metal crashing against metal, echoing across the yard. Immediately, I ran to every window to see what caused the noise. I didn't see anything unusual until I got to the window overlooking the storage shed out back. The door to it was wide open. My heart pounded in my chest. I ran to my room, grabbed the rifle from the closet, and went outside. I yelled, "Who's in there?" But there was no answer. As I got closer to the shed, I shouted again, letting them know I had a gun. Inside, the shed was packed with all sorts of things: a lawnmower, an ATV, and countless gardening tools. Someone could easily hide behind any of it. Usually, I wasn't easily scared, but at that moment, a deep unease washed over me. I realized I couldn't be sure if someone was hiding there, and I wasn't feeling brave enough to confront anyone. So, I quickly shut the shed door, went back inside, and locked the door. I sat by the window, watching the shed, expecting the door to open at any second. The door was heavy. There was no way it could have just opened on its own. Someone had definitely opened it, but whether they were still in there, I wasn't sure. Not knowing what else to do, I went to the kitchen to grab the landline and called my dad. He didn't pick up, so I left him a message. I went back to the window, still keeping an eye on the shed. To calm myself, I turned on the TV for background noise, keeping the phone with me. I was about to give up watching when suddenly I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. My heart practically stopped. Was it real, or was I just scaring myself? Even though I didn't particularly love that place, it was still my home, my family's property, and I felt a responsibility to protect it. I grabbed the rifle again and silently made my way upstairs, not wanting to alert anyone if they were there. At the top of the stairs, I turned on the hallway light. There were 5 doors up there, 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. I remembered hearing the creak from the direction of my parents' bedroom, so I crouched down and looked through the crack under the door. What I saw made my stomach twist into a knot. 2 bare feet facing away from the door. That's when it hit me. Someone was actually in the house. Terror washed over me as I realized I wasn't prepared to confront, let alone threaten anyone. I bolted back downstairs, went straight to the bathroom, and locked the door. I tried calling my dad again and again, but he still didn't pick up. Finally, I dialed 911 and whispered the situation to the operator. She told me to stay put in the bathroom and keep quiet. Then, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, heading straight toward the bathroom. They stopped right outside the door. I held my breath, every nerve on edge. After a few seconds, a deep voice said, "What's up, kid?" Those words and that voice are still seared into my memory. If I heard it today, I'd recognize it instantly. I was terrified, almost on the verge of tears. Ignoring the operator's advice, I yelled out, "I'm on the phone with the cops, and I have a gun." I put the operator on speaker so she could continue talking. The man tried the doorknob, but when he realized it was locked, he walked away. I heard his footsteps fade, followed by the sound of a door slamming. It sounded like the back door. When the police arrived, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. They thoroughly searched the house, inside and out, and confirmed that the intruder was gone. They asked if I had somewhere else to stay that night, and I told them I could go to my uncle's. We called him, and he came over to speak with the police before taking me back with him. What haunts me the most is realizing it was my fault. When I went outside to check the shed, I hadn't locked the back door, and that's how the man must have slipped inside. Even with a rifle in my hands, I'd never felt so powerless. It was, without a doubt, the most terrifying experience of my life. Apartment No. 13. My name is Emily. I recently moved to New York after landing a new job. Finding a decent place to live in this city isn't easy, but I was lucky to find a small apartment in Brooklyn on the 4th floor of an old building. It was apartment 13. At first, I hesitated because the number 13 reminded me of bad luck, but the location was convenient, the rent was affordable, and I didn't want to pass up such a good opportunity. When I went to pick up the keys, the landlord, an old man with a mysterious air about him, silver hair, and deep, shadowed eyes, looked at me for a long time. He hesitated before saying, "Miss Emily, be careful. This apartment, it has things that not everyone wants to face." I paused, a bit taken aback, but brushed it off, thinking he was just superstitious. I smiled, nodded, took the key, and walked into my new home. On my first night, after unpacking and showering, I fell asleep almost immediately. But right as the clock struck midnight, I woke up suddenly, feeling an odd sensation in the air. The room was completely silent, so still it felt oppressive. Then I heard a soft knock from the living room door. Tap, tap. I sat up, staring toward the door. The knock was light, steady, each tap echoing in the darkness. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or noise from a neighbor, but my heart started pounding. A part of me felt uneasy, but I forced myself to lie back down and tried to sleep. The next night, right at the same hour, I was woken up by the knocking again. This time, it was louder, more distinct, as if someone were standing on the other side of the door, persistently knocking at a slow, deliberate pace. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I went to speak with the building manager, a middle-aged man who'd worked there for over 20 years. When I mentioned apartment 13, he gave me a complicated look. Then, after a long pause, he told me the story of that apartment. It had once belonged to a woman named Linda, a quiet, reclusive person who rarely left and always seemed sad. Neighbors hardly ever saw her smile, and sometimes they would catch glimpses of her sitting by the window, her face expressionless, eyes empty and sorrowful. Linda struggled with severe depression, and one day she simply stopped appearing. No one knew what happened to her, and no clues were left behind. Rumor had it that Linda had never really left the apartment, that her despair lingered in that space. A chill ran down my spine as I listened to his story. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a rumor, but that night I was woken again. Right at midnight, the knocking started once more. This time there was also a faint voice, quiet, frail. I pressed my ear close to the door, listening intently. And then I heard it, a soft whisper, filled with pain. "Don't leave me. Please. I don't want to be alone." My entire body went cold, rooted to the spot. The voice was faint, but filled with such sorrow, as if Linda were standing just beyond the door, pleading for help. Part of me wanted to open the door immediately, but fear held me back. I stood frozen, listening to each knock and each heartbreaking whisper, too afraid to act. The next morning, I decided I had to leave the apartment. I couldn't take it anymore. But as I packed up my belongings, I accidentally glanced into the mirror hanging on the wall. For a moment, I saw the reflection of a woman standing behind me. She had long, tangled hair, and her eyes were clouded and empty. She was standing there, watching me through the mirror, her expression filled with sadness and disappointment, as if trying to convey something unspeakable. Terrified, I screamed and ran out of the apartment, never to return. But even in the nights that followed, I could still hear that faint knocking in my dreams, a sound echoing from far away. The knock of a lonely woman still wandering in apartment 13, forever waiting for someone to release her from an endless, haunting sorrow. Laughter in the basement. I had just moved to Chicago and rented a small house in the suburbs. The house was old, but its quiet, vintage charm made me feel safe and even a bit excited. I've always loved houses with history, places that hold the traces of time. But just a few nights into living here, I began to realize that this house held more than just beautiful memories. There was something here that I couldn't quite explain. On the first night, after finishing up with the unpacking, I went to bed early because I was exhausted. I was deep asleep when I suddenly woke up. It was the middle of the night, and I heard a strange sound and laughter. It was very faint, very light, coming from somewhere beneath me, almost directly below where I lay. It sounded like the laughter of a child, innocent yet hauntingly distant. Instantly, a chill ran down my spine. I stayed still, trying to convince myself that it was just an echo from outside, or maybe my imagination. But that eerie feeling wouldn't go away. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening carefully. The laughter came again, soft and intermittent, like two children playing in the darkness. I closed my eyes tight telling myself everything was fine. But deep down, an unshakable dread began to rise, making it impossible to sleep. The next night, I decided not to let the laughter bother me. But just as I was about to turn off the lights, right at the same time, the sound returned, even clearer this time, as if someone were standing in the basement right beneath me. The laughter was still lighthearted, but had an unsettling, almost taunting quality. My heart raced, and I clutched my blanket tightly, feeling overwhelmed by fear. Why would there be children laughing at this hour, in a house where I was the only occupant? The fear gripped me, but I couldn't let this continue. On the third night, when the laughter began again at the same time, I decided to go down to the basement and see what was going on. Holding a flashlight in my shaking hand, I made my way down, its dim beam casting eerie shadows in the dark. As I descended each step, the air grew colder, and an intense silence blanketed the space, filling it with a chilling tension. It felt like I shouldn't be there, but curiosity and determination kept pushing me forward. I scanned the basement with the flashlight, checking every corner. And then the light landed on an old, dusty photo album lying in the far corner. I picked it up cautiously, my fingers trembling as I flipped through the pages. There were pictures of a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children, a boy and a girl. Both children were smiling, but their eyes seemed empty, distant, as if something vital had long since left their gaze. Just as I was about to put the album down, a faint giggle echoed right behind me. Instantly, I froze, my heart pounding as though it would stop. My flashlight wavered as I turned around, shining it into the dark, empty space. No one was there, but I felt an intense, heavy presence as if someone was standing inches away, watching, waiting for me to turn around. Trying to stay calm, I forced myself to step back, but my legs felt weak, overwhelmed by terror. One thought flooded my mind. I needed to leave the basement immediately. I backed up the stairs, each step echoing through the empty space. As I reached the top and shut the door, the laughter began again from below. Ha ha ha. The sound was now unmistakably clear, close, and filled with a mischievous, almost playful energy, as if the 2 children were still there, laughing in the darkness right beneath me. After that night, I never went down to the basement again. But very night, as the house fell silent, the laughter would start again, haunting and relentless. I don't know what happened to the 2 children in those photos, but I could feel their presence. It seemed as if they were still here, playing, laughing in the basement, and had no intention of leaving. I want to leave this house, but it feels like I'm trapped by my own fear. Each time I hear the laughter echoing from below, I wonder, is it simply a lingering memory, or are there truly spirits wandering here, waiting for someone to hear their laughter, the laughter of souls that never found peace? The stranger in the night. I'm Anna, 18 years old, and this is my first time living alone. I recently rented a small house in suburban Texas, not far from the college I'm about to start attending. The house is at the end of a quiet street, a little secluded, surrounded by thick trees. During the day, The place feels peaceful and safe, exactly what I wanted. But when night falls and everything gets dark and quiet, I sometimes feel a little unsettled, especially when the wind blows through the trees outside the window. That night, after a long day of studying and work, I decided to get some sleep. I closed the curtains, locked the doors, and quickly drifted off, not thinking twice about anything. But around 2 a.m., I suddenly woke up to an unusual noise. At first, I thought it might be the branches outside brushing against the window, but it sounded different, a faint noise, like someone was moving around inside the house. I lay there, perfectly still, listening closely as my heart raced in my chest. Maybe I imagined it, I thought, trying to calm myself down. But then the noise came again, louder this time, coming from the living room. It sounded like someone was rummaging through my things, and that's when the fears set in. I knew then that I hadn't been dreaming. Despite my terror, I quietly got out of bed, grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and slowly opened my bedroom door, trying to avoid making any sound. I tiptoed down the hall toward the living room, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. When I reached the doorway, I saw a shadow in the dim light from the street outside, a tall figure moving slowly through my living room, carefully going through my drawers and cabinets like they were searching for something. I froze, holding my breath, too terrified to even move. My mind raced with questions. Why is he here? What is he looking for? And does he know I'm here? I slowly backed away, praying I wouldn't make a sound, but my foot accidentally pressed down on an old, creaky floorboard. The sound echoed through the quiet, and the figure instantly stopped. He turned his head toward me, and in the dark, I could see his eyes glint, cold and menacing. In that moment, I knew he'd spotted me. Panic overwhelmed me, and I turned and ran straight back to my bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it as quickly as I could, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I heard his footsteps coming down the hall, slowly, one step at a time. Then he let out a strange, hissing breath, and I heard a quiet, unsettling chuckle from the other side of the door. A moment later, he started tapping on my door, softly, as if testing my patience, waiting to see if I'd give in. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it would burst out of my chest. In a panic, I unlocked my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, I whispered about my situation, struggling to keep my voice steady, hoping the police would arrive in time. The dispatcher reassured me and told me to stay as quiet as possible and not to leave my room. While I waited, I could hear him pacing outside, then the sound of scratching at the door. Slow, deliberate scratches that felt like they were clawing into my nerves. Every scratch sent chills down my spine. I wondered how long my bedroom door would hold, and whether I could stay calm as he toyed with me, knowing I was helpless behind it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. His footsteps stopped, and I heard him moving away quickly, the front door slamming shut. He was gone, but I stayed frozen in place, my entire body trembling with fear. When the police arrived and began searching the house, I came out, still shaken and trying to pull myself together. They found signs of someone going through my things in the living room and muddy footprints across the floor, but no clues about who he was or why he had chosen my house. One of the officers recommended that I install a security system and be extra careful about locking up. Though they tried to reassure me, I knew I'd never feel completely safe in this house again. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat on my bed, staring at the door, wondering if he would come back. Since that night, every time darkness falls, I feel like someone is watching me from the shadows. A cold, unsettling presence that hasn't gone away, and I can't help but wonder, will he come back someday? The mysterious call. My name is Emily, and I'm 18 years old. Moving into this little house on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. was a big milestone for me, exciting, yet a bit nerve-wracking. Everything felt new and free, but sometimes the silence of the house at night left me feeling alone, with a subtle hint of unease. That evening, after a long day of organizing and cleaning, I was exhausted. I finished up the last few tasks and treated myself to a cup of hot tea before heading to bed. The house was utterly quiet, with only the ticking of the clock and the soft rustling of the wind outside. It felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. I felt like, finally, I had a place of my own. As I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, my phone suddenly rang, shattering the silence. I jolted up, my heart skipping a beat. Who would be calling this late? I glanced at the screen and saw it was an unknown number. I hesitated, but then shrugged it off, thinking it might just be a wrong number. I answered, raising the phone to my ear, and waited. There was no greeting. No one spoke. Just an extended silence stretching on and on. Nearly a full minute passed before I finally heard it, a faint breath, as though someone was standing right next to the phone, just close enough to be heard. The steady breathing made my skin crawl. I immediately hung up, telling myself it was probably just some prank call. I took a deep breath, trying to reassure myself that there was nothing to fear. But then, less than a minute later, the phone rang again, and this time, a deep uneasiness settled over me. Could it really be the same number? I wondered, my pulse quickening. Why would they call again? A bit reluctantly, I answered. This time, I heard a low, raspy voice, distant yet chillingly close, saying only, "I see you." I froze, every muscle in my body going rigid. My heart pounded faster, and a cold wave of dread washed over me. Just as I started to catch my breath, the phone rang again. I didn't want to answer, but it felt like some strange force was compelling me to pick it up. This time, that same voice came through, harsher and colder. "You can't hide from me." I instantly hung up, my hands trembling with fear. I felt as though someone was watching me, somewhere inside the house, their gaze tracking my every move. Every dark corner, every shadow seemed to hold something sinister. My cozy little house was suddenly filled with a disturbing sense of presence, as though it was no longer mine. Determined to end this, I unplugged the phone from the wall, hoping that would silence the relentless calls. But just as I was lying down, finally tucked in under the covers, the phone rang again. The sharp sound pierced through the darkness, even though it was completely unplugged. Cold sweat trickled down my back, my mind blank, unable to make sense of what was happening. Hands shaking, I picked up the phone, almost as if in a trance. The voice came again, softer now, almost a whisper, chillingly close. "I'm already here." Those words sliced through any sense of safety I'd ever felt in that house. And then I heard a faint noise coming from the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps, as though someone was moving carefully toward my room. In that moment, I could swear I heard breathing just on the other side of my door, heavy and close, almost palpable through the thin wood. I was frozen, every nerve on edge, too terrified to move or even breathe. I felt as if even the smallest movement would alert whatever was out there, inviting it into my room. I couldn't take it anymore. I leapt out of bed, threw on my coat, grabbed my keys, and ran out of the house into the night, my hands shaking as I called the police. When they arrived, I recounted every detail, each part of the story etched into my memory. The officers searched every corner of the house, but found no signs of an intruder. After that night, even though the police assured me there was nothing out of the ordinary, I could never feel safe in that house again. Every night, as darkness fell, I would hear little noises from somewhere within the shadows, or feel the suffocating sensation of being watched. The eyes of the stranger, the whisper over the phone, the faint footsteps down the hall. They lingered, haunting me, waiting to terrorize me all over again. The Last Room of Summer. Claire Johnson is a junior at a large university in Wisconsin. U.S. When summer comes, most students leave their dorms to go home or travel. But Claire doesn't have that option. She needs to stay to work and finish her final research. The dormitory where she lived was old, with long dark corridors and thick rough walls. Her room was at the end of the third-floor hallway, a place few people chose to stay because it felt cold and eerily quiet. As her roommates left, Claire quickly noticed the silence that had fallen over the building. There was no more loud footsteps, no more laughter coming through the thin walls, no more sounds from the neighboring rooms. She told herself that she needed to get used to the silence. But then, it didn't stop there. The first night after everyone left, Claire was sitting on her bed, reading a book under the dim light. Just then, she heard heavy footsteps coming from the hallway outside. At first, she thought maybe another student was staying, but the footsteps were slow and irregular. They echoed in rhythm as if someone was shuffling past her door. Claire tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just a security guard checking. But then the footsteps suddenly stopped right in front of her door. Claire held her breath, trying to hear if anyone was outside. Time passed in suffocating tension, but the knock she was waiting for never came. Claire crept closer to the door and peered through the peephole. There was no one outside. Only the dim yellow light from the hallway flickered erratically. A chill ran down her spine, but she told herself it was probably the sound of footsteps coming from downstairs. The strange occurrences began to happen more frequently. Every night, Claire heard strange noises, a light scratching on the door, a low murmur, like someone whispering through the walls. She always told herself it was just her own stress. But things got more frightening on the 5th night. Claire decided to take an early shower to relieve her tension. The bathroom at the end of the hallway always made her feel uneasy. When she entered, the cold air suddenly hit her, despite the hot weather outside. Claire walked to the mirror, preparing to wash her face. Suddenly, she noticed a layer of steam covering the mirror, even though no one had bathed there before. Then a faint line of words appeared from inside the steam. "I saw you." She screamed, backing away in panic. Claire stared at the words, but they disappeared as soon as they appeared. Claire hurried back to her room, closed the door tightly, and locked it. Claire began to have strange dreams. She often dreamed that she was standing in the dark hallway of the 3rd floor, surrounded by wide-open doors. In her dreams, a tall, thin figure with an unclear face stood at the end of the hallway and slowly walked towards her. Claire always woke up before the shadow could touch her, but each time she woke up, she felt cold all over, as if she had just emerged from a nightmare. Then one night, she woke up with a start and realized that her blanket had been pulled down to the floor. There was a clear indentation at the edge of the bed, as if someone had been sitting there all night. Claire felt her whole body freeze. She didn't dare move, just stared at the dark space in front of her. Suddenly, a cold whisper sounded from behind. "Don't come back." Claire felt cold breath on her neck. She didn't dare move, her heart pounding in her chest. With all her courage, Claire jumped up, turned on all the lights in the room, and sat there panting. She knew that this was not just her imagination. There was something present in this room. The next morning, Claire decided to go down to the security room to ask if anyone had ever experienced strange phenomena in this dormitory. The old security guard looked at her silently, then sighed softly. "You're not the first person to see these things," he said. "A few years ago, a girl stayed over for the summer and had the same thing happen, but then she disappeared. No one has found her since." The guard's words sent a chill down Claire's spine. She felt like she had accidentally stepped into a story she shouldn't know about. Claire decided to pack up and leave the dorm the next day, but her last night was the scariest. She locked the door tightly and lay in bed, trying to sleep to make the time pass faster. But just as the clock struck midnight, there was a knock on the door. The knocking was steady, not loud, but so resonant that Claire could feel it pounding against her heart. She tried to ignore it, but the knocking did not stop. It was persistent and haunting, as if the person outside was determined to wait for her to open the door. Claire decided not to open it, but then her door slowly creaked and opened. No one was there. Only darkness poured into the room from the hallway. Then a voice spoke, this time clearly.
"I'll never let you go."
Claire screamed and ran out of the room without taking her things. She ran down the stairs, not daring to look back, even though she felt like something was following her. When Claire ran to the main lobby and opened the door to the building, a breath of fresh air hit her face. She never returned to that dormitory again. Claire's story quickly spread around campus. Rumor has it that the dormitory had been the scene of many mysterious disappearances, and that the spirits of the missing still roamed the empty rooms. No one dared stay there during summer vacation anymore. The third-floor dormitory still stood, silent as a ghost, reminding the students that sometimes solitude isn't the scariest thing, it's the invisible thing that waits in the dark. Cheap room, a nightmare with no way out. Mia is an ambitious young woman. Coming from a poor family in the countryside, she spent her youth pursuing her dream of going to university in a big city. When she received her acceptance letter, Mia decided to take care of everything herself so as not to become a burden to her family. However, life in the city was not as easy as she thought. After days of searching, Mia finally found a room for rent at an incredibly cheap price. The small room was on the second floor of an old building, deep in a deserted alley with long, dark hallways. The landlord only asked for 3 months' rent up front and no deposit, a blessing in times of need. Little did Mia know, this decision would open the door to a terrifying nightmare. The day she moved in, Mia felt something was wrong, as if the place had been abandoned for a long time. The room always had an unpleasant, musty smell, even though the landlord insisted it had been thoroughly cleaned. There were a few black stains on the walls, but Mia didn't care. For her, just having a place to live was enough. The first night, Mia felt something strange. The air in the room was colder than outside, as if the place was frozen. While she was dozing, Mia heard a sound. A very faint creak came from under the bed. She turned on the light, but saw nothing strange. Regaining her composure, Mia told herself it was just the old wood under her bed creaking. But as soon as she turned off the light and went back to sleep, she heard breathing small, soft, right next to her ear. Mia was stunned, not daring to move. In the following days, Mia began to experience more strange phenomena. At night, when everything was quiet, she would often hear footsteps coming from the hallway outside, echoing in slow, steady steps. The scary thing was, the footsteps always stopped in front of her door, as if someone was standing outside, waiting for her to open the door. One day, in the middle of the night, there was a knock on the door, slow and persistent. Mia crept closer and peered through the peephole. There was no one outside, just a long, dark hallway. But as she was about to go back to bed, the knocking came again, louder and more urgent this time. Mia was frightened, standing frozen in front of the door. Then she heard a whisper, soft but clear, coming through the crack of the door. "Open the door." Mia didn't dare to breathe. She stepped back, trembling as she locked the door. Every night, Mia felt the room becoming more and more stuffy. She began to have strange dreams, always the same scene. She stood in the middle of the room, seeing herself sleeping on the bed, but there was a tall, thin figure standing behind her, leaning over her, staring at her. The strange phenomena didn't stop there. One morning, Mia woke up to find her blanket pulled to the floor and handprints on the sheets, as if someone had laid hands on her while she slept. Mia's closet also opened strangely. Sometimes she felt like something was lurking inside, waiting for her to come closer. One day, Mia found a strange object in the corner of the room, an old wooden comb, on which there were still a few long black hairs, but they were dry and rotten with time. Feeling uneasy, Mia decided to find out more about the room she was renting. After searching online, she discovered a horrifying truth. 3 years ago, a mysterious case had occurred in this room. A female student who had lived there had mysteriously disappeared. Police found no signs of forced entry or assault, but neighbors heard her screaming on the last night she was there. Strangely, when police broke down the door, the room was empty. Since then, no one has dared to rent this room again. Those who have stayed here have left after only a few days, recounting that they heard whispers and felt like something was waiting for them in the darkness. Mia decided to leave the room before things got worse. She packed her things and planned to move out the next morning. But on the last night, everything was too much for her to bear. At midnight, the lights in the room suddenly went out. The room was plunged into absolute darkness. Then footsteps sounded again, this time not from the hallway, but from inside the room. The footsteps got closer and closer until Mia felt a cold breath right behind her. She wanted to scream, but her throat felt choked. A cold hand touched her shoulder, pulling her back. In front of Mia, a thin shadow with a distorted face was leaning down, whispering in her ear, "You can't leave." Mia screamed, rushed towards the door and tried to unlock it. But the doorknob was frozen, unable to budge. In her panic, she felt that cold hand tighten around her wrist, pulling her back into the room. Mia had no idea how she got out of that room. When she regained consciousness, she found herself standing on the street, barefoot and shaking all over. She left all her belongings behind and never returned to that room. A week later, the building where Mia had rented the room was suddenly sealed off. The landlord disappeared without a trace, and the police gave no explanation. Mia lives in a different place, but the nightmares still haunt her. Sometimes she still hears a knock on the door in the middle of the night. Every time she opens her eyes, she feels the coldness of the darkness, and a familiar whisper echoes in her head. "You will never escape." Clinton Road, Nightmare in the Moonlight. Clinton Road is the least traveled road in America. Locals warn strangers, do not cross the bridge after dark. According to legend, the spirit of a young boy roams the road, haunting anyone who dares to enter its domain. It is said that if someone throws a coin into the stream under the bridge, the boy will throw the coin back as a warning that you have tampered with something that does not belong to this world. Lisa, a young girl who recently moved to a nearby town, doesn't believe in these stories. She is an adventurous person and is always looking to prove that the rumors are just a figment of her imagination. Late one night, Lisa decides to drive down Clinton Road alone to satisfy her curiosity. It was late at night, the silver moonlight casting a hazy glow over everything. Clinton Road appeared before Lisa like a winding snake lined with barren trees on both sides. Her car sped off into the darkness. As she approached the old bridge that straddled the road, Lisa decided to stop and see if the legend was true. She got out of the car, leaving the door open, her headlights illuminating a clearing. The space was strangely quiet, no wind, no insects. Only the murmur of the small stream under the bridge, the sound like a whisper from another world. Lisa pulled a coin from her coat pocket. Standing on the bridge, she bent down and threw the coin into the water below. The coin landed with a splash, sinking into the dark water. She waited, both excited and nervous. But a few minutes passed, and nothing happened. So it was just nonsense, Lisa chuckled, turning back to the car. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, another splash sounded from the stream below, the same sound as Lisa's coin toss. She paused, turning to look down at the water. The moonlight glistened on the surface of the stream, but something was different. In the middle of the stream, just below the bridge, Lisa's coin floated, spun unnaturally, and sank again. Her heart suddenly beat fast. A cold air crept up her spine. Lisa quickly walked towards the car, but as she reached the door, another sound rang out, light footsteps echoing from the direction of the bridge. She turned around, her eyes fixed on the darkness under the bridge. A small figure stood there. It was a boy, his skin pale, his clothes soaked as if he had just been pulled out of the water. His deep black eyes stared at Lisa, empty and expressionless. Lisa felt her body freeze. The boy walked up the stairs, each step making the air around him thicken. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Lisa tried to calm down, turned around and jumped into the car. She slammed the door, turning the key repeatedly. The engine started with difficulty, the headlights flickered and then came on. The boy was now standing right in front of the car, just a few feet away from her. His face was pale under the headlights, but his dark eyes were still fixed on Lisa, unwavering. Then he slowly bent down and placed a small object on the hood. It was the coin she had thrown into the stream. Lisa choked, her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. "Let's go, let's go," she muttered to herself, trying to calm herself. At that moment, a cold whisper sounded from outside, as light as the wind, but creepy. "Stay with me." Lisa screamed and stomped on the gas. The car sped away with a roar, leaving the bridge and the boy behind. But the nightmare wasn't over. When Lisa looked in the rearview mirror, She saw the boy still standing there in the middle of the road, watching her car until it disappeared into the night. The car sped down the winding road, headlights illuminating every curve, but Lisa still felt like something was wrong. The space inside the car had become strangely cold, and she felt like she was no longer alone. She glanced into the rearview mirror again and immediately froze. In the mirror, the boy's face appeared right behind her, sitting on the back seat, his deep black eyes staring at her through the mirror. Lisa slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop. She spun around, but the back seat was empty. There was only a cold silence. Lisa's heart was pounding. Her breathing was labored. Tried to calm herself down. It was just an illusion, she told herself, muttering to herself to reassure herself. But when he looked back into the mirror again, a scrawled line appeared on the glass. "You will never escape." Lisa screamed, jumped out of the car, and ran into the night. The headlights went out behind her, leaving Clinton Street in complete darkness. Lisa didn't remember how far she ran. When she regained consciousness, she found herself standing in the middle of the woods, her legs scraped and sore. Even though she had left the car behind, the nightmare still followed her like a ghost. She did not dare to return to Clinton Bridge, nor did she dare to tell anyone about what she had experienced. But every night, when the night fell and the wind rustled outside the window, Lisa still heard the familiar sound. The sound of coins falling into the water, and a whisper, "Stay with me." She knew that, no matter how far she ran, the spirit of the boy on Clinton Road would never let her go. Joggers Hill, the dark shadow chases on Riverdale Street. Riverdale Road, an 11-mile stretch between Thornton and Brighton, Colorado, has long been the subject of paranormal stories. But the most terrifying is the legend of Joggers Hill, a hill where locals say a giant shadow roams the streets at night, scratching at the windows of those who drive by. It doesn't stop there. Long, eerie fingerprints will appear on your windows as a reminder that you've entered its territory, and that it could return at any moment. Ethan had heard about Joggers Hill many times. The legend was simple but creepy. Those who drove past at night would encounter the shadow. Ethan, a paranormal enthusiast, decided to test the rumor for himself. Alone in the middle of the night. That night, the moon was hidden behind the clouds, plunging the road into pitch darkness. Ethan set off from Thornton, his hands gripping the wheel, eyes filled with excitement and a hint of trepidation. The car's headlights cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating every curve and the rustling trees along the road. The road was getting quieter. There were no other cars on the road at this hour. Perfect, Ethan thought, because he wanted to experience the full horror everyone was talking about. After a little over 30 minutes of driving, Ethan approached Joggers Hill. The hill, famous for its mysterious stories, lay hidden in the darkness, surrounded by wild grasslands and dense trees. As the car began to climb the hill, the engine suddenly emitted a faint clattering sound. Ethan frowned. His car had always been running well, and he had checked it over thoroughly before setting off today. But halfway up the hill, the engine suddenly stopped. The car skidded to a stop in the middle of the hill, surrounded by heavy darkness. Ethan sighed and turned the key to start the car. Silence. Suddenly, the air felt different. A cold wind blew in through the open window. Everything around him fell into absolute silence. No insects, no wind, only his own breathing echoing in the car. And then, from far away in the darkness, Ethan saw a dark figure. The shadow appeared at the end of the hill, standing still in the middle of the road. Tall, thin, misshapen, like a jogger, but its size was unimaginably large, and its shape was distorted as if it did not belong to this world. Ethan held his breath, his eyes glued to the creature. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized it wasn't walking, it was gliding. Its feet didn't touch the ground, but each time it moved, a heavy sound like footsteps echoed through the air. The dark figure started moving towards his car. Ethan panicked. He turned the key repeatedly, trying to restart the engine, but the car did not respond. As the shadow drew closer, a clatter was heard. 3 soft but clear knocks sounded on the window to his left. Ethan turned his head, and his heart almost stopped. 3 soft but clear knocks sounded on the window to his left. Ethan turned his head, and his heart almost stopped. A large, long hand with abnormal fingers was pressed against the glass, leaving behind slimy, wet fingerprints as if it had just stepped out of a dream. Ethan screamed, jerking back in the car. The shadow didn't look at him through the window, but it leaned down, fingers slowly extending, and tapped again. Knock, knock, knock. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off the strange handprints on the glass. They were unusually long, twisted, and inhuman. They weren't just imprinted on the window, they were spreading, as if the fingers were crawling along the surface, trying to get inside. In a panic, Ethan reached for his phone, but the screen only read, "No signal." He screamed and turned the key again. The car screeched to life and suddenly started back up. Without hesitation, Ethan slammed on the gas. The car shot up the hill and shot down the road on the other side, leaving the blackness behind. Ethan breathed heavily. Hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The car rushed forward at a terrifying speed. But when he looked in the rearview mirror, he froze. The giant black shadow was still following him, gliding quickly on the road as if it would never tire. Ethan's eyes couldn't take their eyes off the mirror. The black shadow was getting closer and closer, and then it appeared right on his back seat. He didn't dare turn around, but in the mirror he saw it leaning over, its head almost touching the back of his neck. Its breath was cold, and its whisper sounded right next to his ear. "You'll never escape." As Ethan tried to brake, the car skidded to a stop in a clearing. He gasped, spun around, but the back seat was empty. He let out a breath, a mixture of fear and relief, But then he saw, on the back window, long, clean fingerprints still there. Ethan didn't dare stay another second. He jumped out of the car and ran into the darkness. He left the car and the shadow behind on Joggers Hill. Ethan never recounted exactly what happened that night, but his life from then on was never normal. Even though he had moved far away, every time he drove at night, he still felt like someone was sitting in the back seat, breathing cold breath on the back of his neck. And sometimes, when he glanced in the rearview mirror, long fingerprints still appeared, a reminder that the shadow of Joggers Hill was always following him, never letting go. Ghost outside the window. Lisa lives alone in a small second-floor apartment in Brooklyn, New York. The apartment is quiet enough for a single person like her to feel comfortable. Winter is enveloping the city, and the outdoor space is plunged into cold darkness. After a long day at work, Lisa returned to her apartment, turned on the heater, and quickly fell asleep. But in the middle of the night, at exactly 3 a.m., she suddenly woke up without knowing why. The room was suffocatingly silent, except for the ticking of the clock and the whistling of the wind outside the window. She looked up at the ceiling in the darkness and felt that something was wrong. It was as if something was moving around her, lurking somewhere in the room. Lisa lay still, trying to calm down. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow pass by the window. Her heart beat faster. How could someone be standing outside her window? The apartment was on the second floor, and there was no balcony outside. She told herself that it was just an illusion. But before she could calm down, the shadow appeared again. This time, it stood motionless by the window, its image reflected on the frosted glass. A chill ran through Lisa's body as she saw the figure move slightly, as if turning its head to look straight at her. Lisa held her breath, hesitating for a few seconds before pulling the blanket up to cover herself. But she couldn't bear the tension any longer. She forced herself to sit up, gently pulling the curtain open a small crack to look outside. Outside, in the dim night, a pale white face was pressed against the glass. The man's eyes were pitch black, empty, and piercing into her as if to suck her mind dry. On that expressionless face, the lips moved slightly as if wanting to say something, but no sound came out. Lisa felt her whole body stiffen, as if frozen in place. She quickly retreated, but her trembling legs made her fall to the floor. When she looked up, that face was still there, staring through the glass with a terrifying patience. She stifled a scream and reached for the light. The sudden light filled the room, making her feel a little better. But the shadow outside the window disappeared as soon as the light came on. She rushed to the window and pulled back the curtains. There was nothing outside but the cold, quiet alley and the patches of snow. There was nowhere for anyone to hold on to, and no sign that anyone had ever been out there. Lisa tried to convince herself that it was just a nightmare. But the next night, at exactly 3 a.m., she woke up again. This time, she woke up to a light tapping on the window. Lisa stiffened. Her apartment was on the second floor. No one could have knocked on her window. A wave of dread rose in her chest as the knocking continued, steady and patient, as if whoever was outside knew she was awake. She didn't want to look out the window, but she couldn't help it. The curtain started to move, as if someone from outside was gently pulling it open with their fingers. Lisa almost stopped breathing when she saw a pair of dark eyes peeking out from the gap, staring at her from outside. She stepped back, her hands shaking as she reached for the phone and dialed the police. But as she touched the screen, the tapping stopped abruptly. Everything went silent. She looked out the window, and the face appeared again, this time with a crooked smile, as if relishing her fear. Lisa screamed and ran out of the room. She locked the bedroom door and huddled in the corner, her whole body shaking. When the police arrived, they searched the area but found no sign of anyone else. No footprints, nothing unusual. Everything was normal, as if nothing had ever happened. A few days later, Lisa decided to investigate her neighborhood. She asked her elderly neighbor who lived in the building. When Lisa told her about the shadow outside the window, the neighbor's face turned pale, as if she was remembering something terrible. She whispered, "You saw him too?" Lisa was stunned. "Who is he?" The old woman said that many years ago, a man tried to sneak into the apartments in the building to find shelter. He would knock on the windows at night, hoping someone would open the door for him. But one winter night, no one heard his knocking, and since then, people say that his spirit has been wandering around, looking for an entrance to these apartments. Lisa froze. "If I open the door, what will happen?" The old woman shook her head. "He won't leave. He will stay. Forever." That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She knew that if she heard the knock again, she must not close the curtains or open the window. The clock slowly ticked towards 3 a.m., and then, like a nightmare, the knocking came again. Lisa tried to ignore it, but the knocking became louder and more urgent, as if the person outside had lost patience. She gathered her courage and walked to the window, but this time she didn't pull the curtains. She stared at the glass, and then a pale hand slowly appeared on the glass, sliding along the surface, leaving a long, cold trail. Lisa gasped, feeling trapped in her own apartment. But then, the curtain was pulled back from the outside, and that dark figure stood right in front of her. This time, the smile on his face was so wide that it was distorted, and those black eyes seemed to suck her in, pulling her into a nightmare with no way out. Lisa collapsed, feeling the cold seeping into the room, as if that shadow had finally found a way to enter her world. She didn't remember whether she had opened the door or not. She only knew that from that moment on, that shadow never left her side. Every night, at exactly 3 a.m., he would appear again, this time not outside the window, but right in her bedroom. Mysterious gas station. Tom is a 19-year-old prankster who loves to scare people. His habit is to wander around at night, looking for unsuspecting people to scare and see their reactions. Tom's pranks sometimes go too far, but he has never really had any serious consequences. Until that night at the old gas station. It was a dark winter night. The suburban road leading to the gas station was deserted and almost deserted. As Tom passed the station, he saw a flickering light inside, which was strange, since he had heard that the gas station had been closed for a long time. The glass door was dirty and covered in dust, but through the crack he could see a man standing behind the counter wearing an old uniform. The clerk looked slow and tired, his eyes dull and lifeless. Tom chuckled. This was the perfect target for his prank. Just give this man a good scare, and Tom would have a good story to tell his friends. He walked to the door and pushed it open. It was unlocked. A soft ting-ting sounded as he entered. The inside of the gas station was damp and messy. The old shelves were covered in dust, a few lights flickered weakly, and the air was filled with the smell of gasoline mixed with humidity. The employee behind the counter did not seem to notice his presence, still looking down at the small ledger. Tom smiled, sneaking up behind the man. When he was only a few steps away, he took a deep breath and shouted, "Boom!" The clerk turned around, startled. His eyes were wide, white in the flashing light. He looked at Tom for a few seconds with an expression of indescribable panic, then without a word, turned and ran straight for the storage room behind the counter. Tom laughed, amused by the clerk's reaction. But the smile on his lips quickly disappeared when the man disappeared into the room and did not return. Tom waited for a moment, thinking that he would come out. But minutes passed, and there was no sound from inside. Is he so scared that he won't come out again? Tom thought to himself, but then a feeling of unease began to creep into his mind. He walked over to the door leading to the storage room and pushed it gently. The door swung open, revealing a pitch-black space. Tom stood in the doorway, hesitating to enter. Something was wrong. It was strangely quiet, as if the room had been deprived of life. He squinted into the darkness. Hey, it was just a joke. Come out, Tom called, but there was no answer. It felt like his words were being swallowed up by the darkness of the room. Tom began to feel worried. He turned to leave the gas station, but when he stepped out, the main door was locked. He turned the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Tom started pounding on the glass. Is anyone there? He shouted, but it was pitch black outside, with no people or cars in sight. Trapped in the old gas station, Tom felt his fear rising by the minute. With no way out, he was forced to turn and face the dark storage room. The inside of the gas station grew more and more terrifying by the second. The flickering lights on the ceiling emitted electric buzzes. The surrounding space became stuffy and cold, as if an eerie air current was filling the room. Tom tiptoed towards the storage room again, trying to suppress the feeling of unease in his heart. Suddenly, footsteps sounded from inside the storage room. Tom jumped, a chill running down his spine. "You're in there?" he called. But this time, the footsteps weren't human. They were heavy, dragging on the floor as if something was moving awkwardly. Tom felt his heart pounding in his chest. He started to back away, but as he turned, the door to the storage room slowly opened. A cold draft of air blew from inside, carrying with it a strong, musty smell. Tom froze in place, not daring to move. From the darkness, he could hear a faint whisper echoing throughout the room. "You shouldn't be here." Tom trembled, trying to stay calm. He stepped back, but the lights in the shop suddenly went out. The room was plunged into absolute darkness. Suddenly, from behind, something scratched the back of his shirt. Tom screamed, panicked, and ran towards the cashier, but his foot tripped over something on the floor. As he tried to stand up, the lights flickered back on for a split second, and for a split second, Tom saw the clerk's feet that were suspended a few centimeters above the floor, as if his body was suspended by something invisible. Tom was desperate to find a way out of this place. He rushed towards the cash register, trying to open the safe or find the key, but all in vain. The whispering again rang out from all sides, mixed with the sound of footsteps dragging on the floor as if something was approaching. He turned and saw the clerk standing just across the counter, his face pale, his eyes wide but lifeless. He stared at Tom, then moved his lips slightly and whispered, "Your turn." Tom screamed, running to bang on the door again, but it was no use. The room seemed to be shrinking, the walls around him trying to swallow him up. As daylight crept through the windows, everything returned to normal. Tom lay slumped under the counter, his whole body shaking, cold sweat soaking his shirt. He didn't remember when he'd passed out. The front door was wide open now, but the gas station was empty. There was no sign of the attendant, no footsteps, and everything was eerily quiet. Tom trudged out of the gas station, his eyes filled with confusion. Even though he had escaped, the horror of the night before still clung to his mind. From that day on, Tom never returned to that gas station, nor did he ever play pranks on anyone at night again. But every time he entered a dark room, he could still hear a faint whisper in his head. "It's your turn now." Scary stories from Amityville, New York. One of the most famous haunted houses in America is the Amityville house, which has been the focus of many horror films and supernatural documentaries. The house is located at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island. Although it looks like an ordinary suburban house on the outside, the events that took place here have left an unforgettable, creepy mark on American supernatural history. In 1975, the Lutz family moved into this house. Not long before, a terrible case occurred. A young man in the old family named Ronald DeFeo Jr. caused a tragedy. And from then on, everything in the house seemed to be no longer peaceful. From the very beginning, They felt a strange cold air regardless of the season. Family members also constantly heard footsteps and whispering voices, even though the house was completely empty. In particular, once they asked a priest to bless the house, but he was slapped hard by an invisible hand and heard whispers of "Get out of here," echoing in his ears. Things got worse. Windows opened in the middle of the night, furniture moved, and family members often woke up with terrible nightmares. George Lutz, the father of the family, even claimed that he felt like a ghostly entity was following him around at night, causing him to panic. After only 28 days, the Lutz family hastily left the house, leaving all their belongings behind. The horrifying experiences in the house have been recounted many times and have become a famous horror story. Although there is much debate about the authenticity of the story, those who have entered this house believe that something inexplicable exists here. The Amityville house remains a symbol of things beyond human understanding, and it continues to attract paranormal investigators and horror seekers. The events that occurred here have left many wondering, what really exists in the darkness of this house? If you are interested in the details of the Amityville story and other creepy events, you can explore more from the resources on haunted houses in America. If you find my story interesting, please like and subscribe to the channel to wait for the next stories.